Crop protection by cultural means. In a natural ecosystem, a balance exists between producers and consumers. A diverse variety of plant species compete with one another and coexist with their insect pests and disease-causing microbes. Plants, animals and microbes live in small mixed populations. If the number of a certain plant decrease, then the numbers of animals and microbes that depend on that plant fall accordingly. And this allows the plant species to recover and balance is restored. A monoculture is a population of a single species of crop plant cultivated for its high productivity, and they may be genetically identical. However, monocultures provide ideal conditions for many pests and plant pathogens which are transmitted very easily. For example, in a natural ecosystem, if a wild oat plant is attacked by a fungus, which attacks oats, the oat plant dies. But the fungus won't attack a neighbouring plant because it'll be too far away. So the next oat plant is unaffected, and there are other species of plants in between. However, in a monoculture, if the same fungus attacks one oat plant and the neighbouring plants are all oat plants of the same type, then there will be widespread damage to the crop. Monocultures must be protected from competition from weeds, grazing by insects and animals, and attack from pathogens, and they must be protected to avoid economic disaster. Weeds are major competitors of crops. Weeds compete with the crop for light, water and nutrients, etc., so the yield will be reduced. Some of them release chemical inhibitors. They can contaminate grain crops, and they can act as hosts for crop pests. If you look at some of the adaptations of common weeds, annual weeds, which complete their life cycle in one growing season, they grow very quickly, produce flowers rapidly, make vast numbers of seeds, which are often dispersed by the wind, and the seeds can remain dormant and viable for very long periods. Perennial weeds can persist and grow for many years. Their adaptations including, once they're already established, they can grow back quickly. They have food storage organs to promote early growth, such as a dandelion, and they can reproduce vegetatively with runners, such as the creeping buttercup. Monocultures provide ideal conditions for herbivorous pests to feed and reproduce. And pests that attack crops fall into three main groups of invertebrates. They are mollusks, nematode worms, and insects. Here are some examples of mollusks and nematodes. This is what they look like. And here is the life cycle of the cabbage white butterfly, from egg to larva to pupa to adult, and aphids, which suck sap from the phloem vessels of crop plants. The plant's vigour and yield is reduced by pests, and some invertebrate pests can also act as vectors for diseases, such as aphids transmitting potato leaf roll virus. Plant diseases are caused by pathogens such as fungi, bacteria and viruses, and they can be soil-borne, airborne, or spread by insect vectors, as in the table below. Plant diseases result in poor yield of the crop. A product that's blemished or infected is less marketable, and the storage life of an infected crop is also reduced. Control of weeds, pests and diseases by cultural means. These are methods that are non-chemical and have evolved from traditional farming methods, and they tend to be preventative rather than curative. For example, ploughing, the top 20 centimeters of soil is turned over and many perennial weeds are buried to a depth to which they die and decompose. Crop plants can then be planted and become established before the weeds return. Crop protection is a practice by which a series of very different crops are grown in turn on the same piece of ground. Once the first crop has been harvested, it's followed the next season by a dissimilar type of plant that does not act as a host to the pest being controlled. Crop rotation is useful, as a pest that can attack only one type of plant is unlikely to survive until its host returns 4 years later. Crop rotation works best against soil-inhabiting species that can only attack a narrow range of host species. Other cultural methods include time of sowing. Winter wheat is sown in autumn, it becomes established before weeds return in spring, and critical time to remove weeds. If you remove weeds early on during the crop growth, the crop is established before the weeds can manage to return. Other methods include removal of alternative hosts. For example, brambles in hedges may harbour aphids, but removal may affect wildlife and biological control organisms. Destruction of crop residue. Burning stubble can kill pathogens on crop residue, and also cover crop. For example, red clover can be grown on fallow fields to compete with weeds. It's a leguminous plant, so it will fertilise the soil.